Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. I'm Stefan Seiler, the Head of Group Human Resources and Corporate Services. It gives me great honor to sponsor our UBS Zero Waste Week and be your host for today's global keynote session on revolutionizing sustainable agriculture and water with technology. Sustainability is a priority for our firm and many of our clients, and it is at the heart of our business too. Our concept of sustainability is guided by the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, which bring together the enormous societal and environmental challenges the world faces. We are among the first financial institutions to announce commitments to the sustainability goals. Dating back to the 1970s, our firm was also one of the first financial institutes to introduce in-house environmental program. And we were the first bank to obtain the ISO 14001 certification for our group-wide environmental management system. I have to say that I'm very proud of our 40-year track record, where we have proven again and again that we are leading within our industry. Not only have we successfully reduced our environmental impact, we also continuously set new ambitions and targets relating to our energy, waste, water, travel and paper use. And we reach our goals. All indicators are trending downwards for our carbon footprint. All kudos goes to you and our in-house environmental management teams for achieving this. Thank you. This year, as we gather for our second UBS Zero Waste Week, we have the unique opportunity to build upon the foundation we have built some years back. Throughout the week, we will be able to hear from incredible speakers, participate in engaging workshops, and explore new ways to become a #Zero Hero. I encourage all of you to dive into the wealth of knowledge offered and bring your new insights to good use. From climate change to resource depletion, the need for sustainable solutions has never been more urgent. And the intersection of technology and sustainability is a dynamic space that is filled with endless possibilities. Be it with sensor systems, automated reporting, or predictive analytics, novel technologies are reshaping traditional practices and ushering in a new era of efficiency and sustainability. Today, we are fortunate to have with us two incredible speakers who are at the forefront of this movement. UBS global visionaries Meena Sankaran, founder and CEO of KETOS, and Chris Bessenecker, co-founder of AfriScout. Meena and Chris are part of our UBS Global Visionary Program, our global accelerator supporting outstanding impact entrepreneurs who are tackling some of the world's most pressing social and environmental issues. Our Global Visionary Program gets right to the heart of what we do at UBS. It's about connecting people with ideas, with other like-minded people, with the tools to turn visions into real solutions. And our world is in need of real solutions. Ones that will make businesses more resilient. Ones that will make economies more successful, inclusive and sustainable. Let me introduce our two speakers. Meena founded Keto to change the world through the power of innovation and people. Among her many achievements, Meena was recognized by Forbes as one of 8 inspiring women founders, chosen by NASDAQ as one of the 2017 milestone makers, and received the Goldman Sachs 2019 Builders and Innovators Award. Accenture and EY have recognized KETOS as one of the top 10 companies creating a positive impact towards climate change. Chris started his vocation as a young Peace Corps volunteer, supporting poor rural communities in the mountains of Honduras. His careers have since taken him to all corners of the globe to work with some of the world's most vulnerable populations. Throughout this time, he has recognized that the best solutions come first from listening, observing, and valuing the insights the communities bring, and to co-create new solutions together with them. Now, before handing over to Mina and Chris, I would like to point out that you can already now submit your questions for our global visionaries via UBS TV, and we will cover as many as possible towards the end of our session. And with this, I'll hand it over to Mina and Chris, who will both share a short presentation before we go into an exchange of ideas.
Thank you, Stefan, for the very kind and thoughtful introduction. Honored to be here. So before I dig in to really talk more about what KETOS is and what KETOS does, let me give you and share a couple of quick facts. About 898 trillion gallons of water are used annually by the top 10 water consuming countries in the world. And people may not be aware of this, but globally, about 359 billion cubic meters of wastewater are produced each year. And a fun fact for someone who's thinking industrial, the amount of wastewater that is generated in terms of the emissions that are generated by wastewater is as equivalent as much as the aviation industry. And water is make or break for climate action. So when you think about wetlands and all of the wetlands and peatlands that can store twice as much carbon as forests, yet they're being destroyed 3 times as much, we have to pause and think about, are we really taking water as seriously as we are thinking about carbon? And I always joke about this, that carbon has better marketing than water. And people are really associating carbon with climate change or climate action, but not as much as water. And so today, I hope in the couple of minutes that we have together, I really want to be a strong advocate for really representing what water is and how we need to think about water, how businesses and people need to be transforming their operations and how they run their businesses to really think from a water-centric standpoint. So all of that would mean nothing if you're not able to measure it. So that brings me to the first slide here, and I'm not going to really do a death by PowerPoint for all of you, but we'll try to just nibble on a few things here. So think about how can we move away from the archaic approach of manual lab-centric testing, which is what exists today. And so there are 5 things we should be all thinking about. How can we have our systems in today's day and age be entirely autonomous? So that's a requirement. We shouldn't even be discussing it, but think sensor systems, as Stefan mentioned, should be automated. So our first A is autonomous. Second, we need to have systems that actually deliver accurate data. Business leaders need to have data-driven decision-making capabilities or the tools in their fingertips. So how do you make the second one accurate? Third is, how do you give them actionable data? People are overwhelmed with data. There's a massive amount of data in all your sectors. So how do you actually get to accurate data? And fourth, how can you make it affordable? Budgets are shrinking. People are operator level or plant level or GM or even C-suite. Everyone's thinking more consciously about budgets and where capital is allocated. A lot of times CSOs don't even have the budgets to actually implement solutions that they're excited about. They can only be influencers. So key part is affordability. And it's not just technological innovation, but business model innovation. You have to think about the trifecta of technology with innovative business models, with policy. All 3 of these have to move a long ways in order to bring the change that we need. So let me dive for a couple minutes on how KETOS is actually solving for this. So what we've built with KETOS, I founded this company about 2015. And as Stefan said, I'm the founder and CEO of KETOS. We've been at this journey now we just celebrated our 9-year anniversary. So it feels like a couple of decades as an entrepreneur. And it has been a terrific journey from all of the trials and beginnings. So think about how you can bring a very cross-functional, very interdisciplinary solution for a complex challenge like water. So KETOS sits on the brink of robotics meets material science, meets data science with IoT for the world of water. And what do we achieve? We really hit on multiple things, but three key targets: risk mitigation, your P&L impact, your operational efficiency, but all of that tied together brings sustainable impact. So we measure primary impact to operations, secondary impact to the entire business and the environment, and third impact is how are you achieving climate change for the future, climate action for the future? Are you really hitting your net zero goals? Are you really achieving some of your water positive goals that you need to achieve? Can you flip to the next slide, please? So as we think about what are, how can we move forward with this? What are the different types of actors in this game? The key players are, you look at municipalities, which is your public sector, your private sector, but your state, federal entities. And then you have the agriculture segment, and then you have the entire industrial. When I say industrial, I'm talking about mining, chemicals, oil and gas, your food and beverage, bottling, poultry processing, power plants, steel manufacturing, all of the above. So as of today, KETOS operates in 9 countries, including United States. We are monitoring about 45 billion gallons of water globally. We've been able to reduce, just with the amount of deployments we've done in under 5 years of commercial deployments here as a startup, 2,400 metric tons of carbon. And we have been able to generate close to 300 million data insights that are proprietary water quality data insights that didn't exist. Data is gold. Data is where all of the value is going to be generated for clients. And that actionable data is going to potentially lead to insights which could potentially prevent a disease outbreak or even make researchers believe in the kind of predictions that are going to help us as a community. Can you go to the next slide, please? So as you think about, what is critical, what types of water should we be thinking about? How are we looking at this? Why hasn't somebody else been able to do this? The complexities of water monitoring are significant. So KETOS actually has built all the IP, the sensing, the methodologies, the development for monitoring water quality composition in surface water, groundwater, produced water. When I say produced water, it's more oil and gas, frac wells, looking at processed water optimization, drinking water. It's a wide variety and matrices of water that we should be thinking about. And you can flip to the next slide, please. And as we think about all of these different water types, there's a massive amount of parameters and contaminants we should be looking at. And this is extremely unique to KETOS because a short way of explaining to someone is think about IBM mainframe. So going from IBM mainframe, fast forward 20 years, VMware came in, massively disrupted the sector. And so in a similar manner, KETOS has been really able to come into the market and take a very holistic approach of, bringing a menu of offering to clients in a way that parameters are interchangeable. We can own, maintain, and service the solution. That's a really intrinsic part of the KETOS value proposition is how different our business model is. So as you go on further, Suzanne, please continue to the next slide. The key part is how do you get water data at your fingertips, anywhere, anytime, on a global footing. So you're essentially, as a C-suite member, building a NOC, and you can think about all the factories. So if I am a chemical distributor, or if I'm a large chemical manufacturing company, I can look at my 60 plants or 125 plants around the world and know exactly what's happening at what point in time, and how can I be proactive, how can I be preventative, and how can I be predictive. So it's automation all the way from sampling to AI in one integrated, cohesive tech stack. So, we've been very well recognized, and that's been an incredible opportunity, as Stefan mentioned. But I want to share one other impact. If you can flip the next slide, please. As companies look at how do we absorb this value, an important metric for this is what is the amount of labor efficiency you're able to get. On an average, as an industrial customer, you're able to get about 40% labor efficiency, even at a very minimal use. You're looking at, within a matter of 3 months, $250,000 in terms of savings just on labor and lab savings alone. You're looking average of 300 to 400% increased visibility from a compliance and regulatory aspect. And all this besides doing the sustainability, positives of reducing carbon, and by the way, no violations happening during the installation and post-install. So these are critical things to realize. And as you move forward, one of the key things I want to, you can flip the next slide, please, maybe a couple more. And the key thing I want you to think about is, how can a business model like KETOS, where we are essentially allowing for the mutual partnership with the client, that's the future. It's all about data as a service, where KETOS can maintain the equipment, we can service it. We're not expecting customers to become an overnight expert, and we're really able to increase adoption and acceleration, because data is power. You have to empower the operators. And at the end of the day, there are a wide variety of ways in which we're helping many of the SDG goals, as well as on ESG reporting. And believe it or not, for folks, water is not a nonprofit. In my original days, Stefan, when I started the company, people would always say, "Oh, you're thinking about water, is it a nonprofit?" There is about 20 billion across 10 key global markets that is being projected as the global digital market, just starting off. And that's about just across 44, sort of like water solution providers. We are expecting water monitoring to grow between 80 billion in 2020 to 400 billion, 475 billion to be exact, by 2030. Those are massive numbers, and there will be wars fought over water, if they're not already, around the world. And with that, I think I'd like to pause and hand it over back to you, Stefan, that it's an incredible opportunity to be here. I can't wait to talk more about what we do. And Sue-Ann, if you don't mind, just kind of pausing at slide 13, at least it gives a glimpse of how our systems are deployed for the audience here, and really get a sense of how to think about, the value of this across markets, looking at smart water from a smart data for industry, smart data for agriculture, and smart data for cities. So thank you, Stefan.
Thank you very much, Mina, for the really, really insightful presentation. We will have more time to discuss some of your endeavors later on when we go into the dialogue. But before we go there, let's hand over to Chris. Chris, that you can share your experiences which you have developed by founding and co-founding AfriScout.
Great, thank you, Stefan. Hi, everyone. I am Chris Besniger. I am the founder of AfriScout, which is a social enterprise under the nonprofit organization called Global Communities. I'm also honored to be a U.S. Global Visionary and pleased to be part of this kickoff of Zero Waste Week. Peter Drucker once said that the best way to predict the future is to create it. And I know that UBS believes in this philosophy, and so do I. So today I'd like to share with you how global communities, in partnership with some of the poorest communities around the globe, are trying to do just that. Next slide. So for me, this journey, go back one slide. Right there, yeah. For me, this journey began in 2006. As a humanitarian worker, I was dispatched to Ethiopia to respond to one of the worst droughts in decades. This was a drought that led to catastrophic losses of crops, livestock, and lives. And as I was driving across this withered landscape, I encountered the family you see pictured here. Curious to know why they were there, I stopped and I asked them. And I learned that they had walked for 14 days to this very location based on word of mouth that there was pasture, only to find the place where their animals would soon die and their livelihoods would be lost. Now, I was sent there to organize what would be a traditional response for a humanitarian organization, the provision of emergency food aid. But it was this encounter that led me to rethink the problem, co-create a solution with pastoralists, and discover that by helping them, they might actually save us. Next slide, please. So Africa's grasslands cover 42% of the continent, and they're stewarded by 270 million pastoralists, like the family that I met. And it is, in fact, their animals and the migration patterns that have sustained these lands for thousands of years. But the information sources that they use for making critical migration decisions, sources like word of mouth, scouting, indigenous knowledge, have been failing at greater and greater rates as climate has upended traditional patterns, growth patterns. So the conventional wisdom has been that if pastoralists can't find pasture, it's because it doesn't exist. But this assumes inaccurately perfect knowledge across thousands of square kilometers of rangeland that's continuously changing. Instead, they say that it's climate change resulting in too little rain or overgrazing resulting from too many animals. But in many parts of Africa, while patterns of rainfall have changed, the overall amount has not. And while overgrazing can indeed result in degradation, so too can undergrazing. And so how animals move and the reliability of the information on where and when to graze are critical. Now, over the years, we've met with hundreds of pastoralists who have shared the same stories about moving to places where they thought there was pasture only to find that there wasn't, and how it devastated their livestock. And so they urgently needed a new solution. And so together we created AfriScout. Next slide. So I say together because pastoralists have been engaged from the start in co-designing this tool. So what is it? Well, AfriScout's an application that fuses traditional knowledge with satellite and mobile technology to create custom grazing maps. And these maps give pastoralists a bird's eye view that they've never had before, so that they can see their entire grazing areas and the changing vegetation conditions, which are updated every 10 days. This allows them to make more precise and informed decisions on where and when to move their animals. It also shares critical information on things like restricted grazing or animal disease and other information crucial for managing both their animals and the land. Next slide. To date, we've mapped over 62 million hectares across 3 countries. 48,000 pastoralists have downloaded and used the app. And our research shows that for every household that has the app, they will share that information with 7 other households, representing a reach of about 2.3 million pastoralists. Next slide. So through continuous feedback loops, we're witnessing the impact the tool is having in real time. Beyond better migration, it's increasing things like animal vaccinations. It's helping pastoralists to avert conflict with wildlife or other communities, and ultimately breathing life into communities that have been in decline. Next slide. This impact was actually backed by a Fordham University study in 2018 that showed AfriScout to be an essential tool that improved pasture management, reduced conflict, and actually increased the value of their livestock. And now this map is an essential tool for many pastoralists. Next slide. As we've experienced AfriScout in real time and the impact that it's having in these communities, we began to think about how pastoralists and AfriScout can solve one of our greatest global threats, which is climate change. And much like how Mina shared that how water sort of gets short shrift to carbon, we think pasture gets short shrift when compared to things like trees. People tend to think about trees as being carbon, but actually pasture lands, because of their huge expansive coverage across the globe, actually harness the potential to sequester a lot of carbon. In fact, studies have shown that regenerative grazing will sequester somewhere between 1 and 5 tons of carbon per hectare per year. And so we started thinking about how can AfriScout play a critical role? How can pastoralists play a critical role beyond the tool that we had developed? Next slide. So with that in mind, we've been further enhancing AfriScout to more intentionally support regenerative grazing. Our traditional application, which we now call AfriScout Steward, is a core app that is an information service. But AfriScout Regen becomes a management tool geared to supporting regenerative grasslands that can sequester carbon. And this is based on principles of something called adaptive multi-paddock grazing, or AMP. And essentially, AMP requires subdividing grasslands into paddocks and moving animals uniformly in a bunched grazing pattern. Now, this has been done on private rangelands where it's small rangelands where you have a small herd that are owned by one person. Easy to do, much harder to do over thousands of square kilometers of rangelands with hundreds of pastoral families moving their animals. So we developed a version of AMP that's specifically geared towards pastoralists and pastoral communities in applying this regenerative grazing practice. And we're developing AfriScout Regen as an intuitive tool to help them manage that. Next slide. So to date, we've worked with 70 what we call RGUs, or regenerative grazing units. This is in Ethiopia. And we train these communities on administering this new way of thinking and this new practice. These 70 RGUs represent 1.8 million hectares that are currently under regenerative grazing practices. We've also conducted extensive soil and biodiversity sampling as the baseline for entry into the voluntary carbon market. And we've begun working with communities to create benefit sharing agreements. So they will be the primary recipients of the funding from the work that they do in essentially growing grass and sinking carbon. We've also been working on the AfriScout Regen app that will be used to help them manage that process. Next slide. So what's our goal? Our goal is by 2030, we will have 10 million hectares of Africa's grassland under this regenerative grazing practice. To give you a reference, that's double the size of Switzerland. And this would make AfriScout one of the largest regenerative grazing projects in the world. Through that process, we anticipate sinking 46 million tons of carbon. And now sequestering that amount of carbon over 20 years would be the equivalent of removing 50 billion pounds of coal from being burned, or eliminating 117 billion miles of travel by gasoline-powered vehicles. As I said, we are entering this into the voluntary carbon market that creates a revenue source, a new revenue source for communities, and also will help sustain AfriScout long-term. And finally, through this process, with both AfriScout Steward and Regen, we are giving approximately 5 million pastoralists the ability to help reclaim their traditional practices, overcome poverty, and transition from climate survivors, climate leaders. Next slide. So we have a diverse team of individuals and partners that bring expertise in pastoralism, community resilience, remote sensing, and software development. And we're committed to support the vulnerable population and the world we share. And next slide, and thank you very much. And back to you, Stefan.
Thank you very much, Chris, also for your presentation, what you and AfriScout are doing. Very, very impressive. I mean, listening to these numbers from both presentations, it shows the potential we have ahead of us, or you are already tackling, actually, I have to say, on how we can improve by embracing technological opportunities and using them in the contexts and in the environments where we are operating to really magnify and multiply the opportunities that would be there if we would just approach things in a traditional way. Maybe that leads me to my first question. Both KETOS and AfriScout are, as we just have heard from both of your presentation, very much at the cutting edge of the usage of cutting edge technology. And the question I have there is, How do you differentiate from other companies or institutions who are operating in similar environments, and also where do you see the potential for the solutions you bring to the market? I mean, you have shared, Chris, the aspiration for 2030. Where do you see this to go? How does your product differentiate from others that are in the market? Maybe we can start with you, and then the same question to you, Mina. But Chris, let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah, well, essentially there was no market. Pastoralists are some of the most remote populations on the planet, and I mentioned some of the conventional wisdom and assumptions about pastoralists' ability to find pasture, but the world has shifted, the environment has shifted, and with that, the ability to use traditional methods alone have become less reliable. And so they needed a new tool. There was also the assumption that pastoralists have an aversion to new technology or new ways of doing things. And it's just a myth. Most communities around the globe will use tools that are useful to them and are continuously adapting, and pastoralists are no different. And so when we started looking at technology and looking at how smartphone technology in particular was penetrating the continent, we knew that this was an opportunity that we could leverage to support this vulnerable group. And in fact, this year, the first quarter of 2024, the sale of smartphones on the continent of Africa have surpassed feature phones. And this is only going to continue to trend towards smartphone access and 4G coverage through the infrastructure. And so this was just a technology that was already available and trending higher that we knew that we could leverage to support this community.
Very interesting. And it's interesting to see how you can improve the life of people generating income, also have a positive effect on carbon footprint, and all that with applying technology in a smart way. So maybe, Mina, to you the same question. How do you differentiate in the market? Where do you see the opportunities that are there, and also what benefits most in the markets you are operating in?
Yeah, absolutely, Stefan. As I briefly mentioned, the world of water quality monitoring has really resided in sort of like manual lab testing. You still talk about sending a guy out, picking up a lab sample, driving over for several hours, and then after a week back, you get some test results. I mean, it's fascinating, as Chris mentioned, in this day and age where everyone is tracking everything, even on their body, with all the Fitbits and all the sensors that we have on our system. Somehow we don't understand the quality of the water we drink in the cities we live in, and it's just not been a priority. And so when you look at the volume of data that's available, that's actionable, Stefan, we have a problem because we have waste data. We even have air quality data, but we don't have high caliber water quality data. And give you a very quick example. I grew up with maybe about 15 waterborne illnesses before I was even 15 years old. It probably made me stronger for COVID, but net, I grew up in a region where essentially it was okay. It was the norm. We got an hour of water a day, and we just filtered water multiple times and drank it thinking that now it's going to be safer than what it was before. It's what you knew, but that's how it was for decades, and parts of the region. It probably still continues like that in India. And so it was kind of compelling for me that it's shocking that we're letting it be that way when there is so much of technology that's possible. And coming from a data center type of world and a very technologically advanced segment of the market, for me, using that into the water sector was a must. And so really leveraging the innovation around robotics and leveraging some new techniques and patents, and really bringing our own fold of ideas to solve this was critical. So if you look at differentiators, I mean, you're talking about some instrumentation companies that are out there that have built some instruments, Stefan, but it's really handheld probes. You dip it in the water, you see some color change, or you're still looking at instruments the size of a refrigerator costing millions of dollars, and somebody still has to be extremely sophisticated to manually calibrate that equipment for a couple of parameters and understand contamination. We have to make it accessible. If we're not making it accessible, if we're not making it less cost prohibitive, actually even shift it further, make it affordable, we cannot get mass adoption. If we can get mass adoption, we can get the kind of data that's going to tell us what's happening at the ground level. And without that understanding, we can't actually prevent a disease outbreak that's happening from water. We could have prevented Flint, Michigan from happening until the amount of people affected. And there's still people in denial when usually when I say water quality, even 8 years ago, folks would ask me if I'm working in Africa or India. They would not realize that this is happening in your backyard in the United States or other developed countries in Europe. And so it is a shared problem. It's an ubiquitous issue. And so we're creating a new market, and now we're seeing massive amount of companies, Stefan, coming in as platform companies. But you have to realize it's fancy to do AI platform companies, but it's all about the data that you put in. So if you don't have very high quality data that you put in, your fancy models are not going to really take you anywhere. And I think that we felt the need and the compelling challenge to create the sensors to actually detect the data and then be able to bring about the massive change as we grow into a very data-centric play for clients across the world.
Very, very interesting. And I mean, we all learn here, listening to both of you, that data matters in financial services, in banking a lot, but it also matters a lot in the businesses you operate in. Maybe one question which came to my mind when we think about how you operate, and I fully agree, by the way, Mina, reading some of the studies and the news also, which we hear about water quality also in developed places, once of a sudden we realize, oh, that's not just a problem for others, because even water quality in developed places at times becomes an issue. But this leads me to the question, in many places with less resources available, with a lot of poverty, the water quality is even poorer, and for people it is more difficult to get to clean water. How do you deal with that issue that maybe these places also have less buying powers? It's maybe more costly to install the sensors there, to measure, to get the data from these places. How do you deal with that? And maybe the following question would then also be for Chris. Later on, if I think about the challenges linked to the app solution, you need to have some sort of access to mobile data, because otherwise your phone wouldn't work, and some of the most rural places might be challenged with access to mobile data. So a bit for both in the same direction, how do you connect with people who live in some of the most exposed, most vulnerable places?
No, it's a great question, Stefan, because for me personally, focusing on low-income communities, disadvantaged communities is a priority, and we look at it as how are we measuring our own social impact on a quarterly basis, not just the financial metrics for investors, as a company. But I think the critical part there, Stefan, is the business model. One, you have to be sustainable as a startup if you want to make the kind of impact you want in a broader front. So you can't just give equipment or solutions for free, but there are ways to partner. And I think that's where a community comes into play. That's where collaboration comes into play. A perfect example is when we were trying to work in the northeastern part of India, where arsenic is a massive issue and it causes kidney diseases. And there's also regions where we looked at high carcinogenic content from chromium. The way we decided to actually engage and build the model is, first off, we don't sell the equipment. So they don't have to have CapEx, this large capital infrastructure, $0 CapEx. So if we're making it an OpEx model of really a subscription type approach, we're absorbing the cost over long term. So if we can partner with like CSR projects of large initiative companies, we're doing a massive lake restoration right now in Mexico City. I mean, this lake was supposed to serve a massive amount of agriculture and farming communities that are now impacted, Stefan. And so we've taken a large nonprofit. We've taken a large technological, centric company that's a bit more sustainably aware. I'm kind of reserving their names. And all of them kind of collaborating together really put in the resources from a social cost model of a project to bring the impact that we need to see in the next 3 to 5 years for this region. Not only are we going to impact the aquatic species in the lake, but also the foliage around, and then all the farming communities around. So a very quick example, that's one, but another one is getting communities involved. Chris mentioned this. It's a circular economy. So if we're able to employ the local village folks or even the rural community folks, train them to actually maintain it instead of me employing a person or putting that person in and then getting them involved, it pulls in the rural improvement from a migration perspective. They're not leaving their rural areas to go to cities. It gives them employment, it gives them ownership, it gives them pride to take care of their own resources. And then you're making them part of that solution rather than them being just, dealing with the problem. As Chris said, climate leaders rather than climate survivors, right? So it's a very typical model I've seen that truly is successful. And so we've been experimenting that with especially regions, outside US and within US, but extensively within US has been about cross collaboration with nonprofits and corporate CSR initiatives to hit key goals.
Very interesting. So basically designing a business model and an operating model that enables different partners to participate and together then create something that works for the environments you're in. Very, very, very interesting. Very interesting.
Absolutely. Ultimately, the communities are the priority and they should not be forgotten.
Interesting. Chris, maybe to you, the question I raised before, how do you deal with that challenge? Or maybe it is not a challenge in today's world anymore, that you have accessibility issues in the different parts you operate or where the farmers are operating?
Yeah, Stefan. Well, when we first started developing AfriScout as a proof of concept, we did it on paper. So we took satellite data, we sat down with communities and mapped their traditional grazing areas, and then we overlaid that data on these paper maps, and then we worked with government officials, agricultural extension agents, who would then print out 50 copies of these, take it out to the communities and distribute them. We realized that was not going to be a way to scale. It was a way to demonstrate, that it was a valid application, but we knew that wasn't going to be the way to scale. And what we saw in mobile data on the continent was this massive movement towards smartphones. So just much like how AfriScout or how Africa leapfrogged the Western world in terms of just quickly transitioning from landlines to feature phones, they were also rapidly changing from feature to smartphones. And there are a couple reasons for that. The cost of smartphones precipitously decreased in price. And there was a market. There was, they value data just like we do. And so the mobile phone companies were moving towers further and further out into rural areas, and that continues to this day. So all we did as AfriScout was we leveraged the market forces that were already at play, but creating a tool that has validity for that community. Users want content that is relevant to them, and that's what AfriScout is for these pastoral communities.
Very interesting. So basically leveraging the developments that happen and then adding the tools and procedures to what matters most on the ground. Very, very interesting. Maybe a very short last question from my side before I hand over to Luca then to moderate for questions that came in via UBS TV. And I know this could be a long answer, but if you could try to be in 1 or 2 minutes each. What is coming? So where do you see the journey going to? Without giving, of course, too many proprietary informations to us here. But what is coming? Where is this intersection of technology, agriculture, water? Where is it going to? Where is it bringing us? Where do you see the future in 5 years? Maybe Chris, we can start with you.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned in sort of the latter half of my presentation, we realize that the way that pastoralists move their animals can play a critical role in growing grass. And what growing grass is carbon. So it's essentially sinking carbon both above ground and below ground. In fact, with grass, about 75% of that carbon is beneath the ground and its roots and all the organic organisms that operate around that ecosystem. And so by doing what is in their best interest, growing grass, they're actually contributing to our ability to address climate change by sinking carbon. So if you look at the amount of additional carbon that has been created since the industrial age, it comes out to be about 217 gigatons. The estimates of what you can, how you can address that through sinking carbon across the global grasslands is somewhere between 2 and 5 gigatons per hectare, or 2 to 5 gigatons per year. And so there's a massive potential to address our climate issues on the savannas and grasslands across the globe. And as I mentioned, 42% of the continent of Africa is grasslands, and they're stewarded by these communities, these pastoralists. And so if we can enable them and give them the tools to do what they want to do anyway, grass is life for them. Grass is their survival. And if you can help enable them to move their animals in particular ways, it is improving their livelihoods. It is improving biodiversity, and it's sinking carbon. And so that's going to be our focus over the next 5 years and beyond.
Well, I think, Chris, you have equipped all of us with a new example of what is a real win-win. Maybe, Mina, over to you. Where do you see the developments on the water space?
So Stefan, there's only 1% of fresh water accessible. We can't invent that. So it's the cards we have and how we have to work forward. So the way we have looked at this is, how do we enable everyone to be really, accelerating their sense of urgency as a start. And about that, it means water reuse, water recycling. 45% of our clients are, water recycling, but how do you get them to 90% of water reuse? So I would say one of the top priorities are water reusing, water recycling, water replenishment. And the more we can work with public entities for credits, it's another way to sort of accelerate and incentivize people on really giving them water replenishment credits. And more importantly, getting more folks to actually re-inject water back into the aquifers, because we can't have the depletion of aquifers that's happening right now and the rate at which the depletion is happening. So just the latest metric was that there's another 9,000 wells that are going to go dry by 2030, and we've already had about 5,300 wells go dry since 2014, and this is just for the state of California. So, the net amount of water quantity that needs to get increased so that we have water available for future generation is in a pretty dire state. And so I would say that is number one. And our journey in that process is about elevating that sense of urgency, giving people the tools to make that happen for their own operations, which in turn saves them dollars, gives them a good brand, but in turn, they're saving the environment, they're putting, their own brand credits for what they're achieving for the future. And from an agriculture standpoint, it's really helping the farming community, especially on permanent crops, towards understanding groundwater composition so they can reduce fertilizer intake, reduce the chemical composition. We're all ingesting a lot of chemicals. And I know Chris and I probably can get into a whole conversation about just agriculture and water of all our farm clients that, with how they're taking, essentially what we're giving them is we're taking satellite data, their crop data, the water quality data, we're integrating all of that, and then we're giving them optimal crop yields so that, you know, their rural runoff is less toxic. So to say the least, Stefan, there's so many avenues between industrial, agriculture, and municipality from the types of water. Each one of them has multitude of avenues of impact of what we want to achieve in the next 5 years. But the net goal is about raising that sense of urgency and increasing the net amount of water available as a global community.
Excellent. I mean, thank you for these insights. I think listening to both of you, it's very clear that why you're part of the UBS Visionary Program, and it's a privilege for us to have people like you, which we can partner with. But we have a bit more time to take a few questions from the audience. Luca, can I hand over to you?
Of course. Thank you, Stefan, and thank you everyone for sending in your questions. Let's start right away with the first one, which is for you, Chris. So one of our colleagues is wondering whether AfriScout has the plans to replicate its technology to other countries that have also a similar nomadic community.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, 42% of the continent is grasslands, and in almost every country where there are savannas or grasslands, there are pastoralists. So just to define what a pastoralist is, a pastoralist, as opposed to like a farmer that maintains animals that are sedentary, pastoralists move their animals in some kind of migratory pattern. It's usually seasonal. And so they exist in all across Africa. So from the farthest north to the farthest south, east and west. In fact, next month, we'll be going to Ghana to be scoping out pastoralists in those communities who have also been sort of marginalized. Most pastoral groups, because they do move, they're not sedentary, are often the groups that are most marginalized. So they indeed exist throughout the continent, and in fact beyond. We know in Mongolia there are pastoralists. So this application has similar potential in other parts of Africa and other parts of the world.
That is highly interesting. And moving on to the next question, which is kind of switching from future plans to the past. Mina, one of our colleagues is wondering what your inspiration was to start KETOS. I know that you mentioned the connection of waterborne illnesses and unsanitary water, but maybe you could also elaborate on how you got in touch with this high-tech environment.
Sure. Thank you, Luca. Well, I believe in inspiration, picking it up from everywhere. And one of my favorite quotes is, "Be the change you wish to see in the world," from Mahatma Gandhi. And I think for me personally, Luca, as I'd mentioned briefly, growing up in India and being one of the first kids in a family to come into a foreign country and do higher education, like a lot of immigrants in most parts of the world, it's not uncommon. But the drive for me was, you know, somewhere subtle undercurrent within me that I wanted to, you know, find my ikigai in a way where my purpose and my passion and my skill really come together. And I think after 15 years of being in the tech sector, I sort of really felt pushed to not just use technology for another advancement in tech, but use technology for an application that not only had a broader commercial impact, but truly have a massive social impact. And I could only think of three things: water, air, and food. And so as I thought about, you know, the nexus of all of that, water just sort of feeds into all of the aspects. And then it kind of went back into my own personal interest of what I had been through in my experience with water. And it just felt like, you know, your job cannot just be a job, even if I was in multiple startups. And even if, Stefan, it was extremely lucrative to work in all the large companies 15 years ago, but I would not change what I have done over the last decade. it truly feels like you're living your purpose regardless of the outcome. And every drop saved, every farmer happy, every every bit of impact that you have, whether it's food security or otherwise, just makes it that much more fulfilling. So Luca and I can go on for hours about this topic, so I'll pause.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I think we would all be curious to hear much more from you and from Chris, but sadly, in the interest of time, we have to move off. So I would hand over to Stefan again for the closing.
Thank you very much, Luca. And indeed, as you said, we could probably go on here for quite a while and continue the very, very inspirational conversation we have here. I think at UBS, we can also all be very proud that we are supporting many of real initiatives that are at the forefront of our innovation, its impact, that they all come together for the benefit of people, for the benefit of our planet, and we do it together with our partners. But as we come to the end of this of these enlightening keynote sessions with Mina and Chris, let me also reflect a little bit on what we have heard today and on the incredible potential that lies before us, because that's my key takeaway. What is possible in the future? Today's session has showcased the power of technology, not just as a tool, but as a catalyst for impactful change. Our speakers have highlighted some groundbreaking innovations, have shared, in my view, invaluable insights into how we can use technology to address some of the most pressing sustainability challenges facing the world today. What stands out most to me is the clear message that emerged from these conversations. We can harness the power of technology to drive us toward a more sustainable future. And it's not just about the deployment or the developing of the new tools and systems. It's also about rethinking on how we organize our life, how we organize our work, and how we interact with the people in the communities and with the environment we operate in. It's about using data to make informed decisions and empower organizations and communities to take sustainable action. In closing, I would like to thank Mina and Chris for the very inspiring conversations, and to all of you for your engagement and thoughtful questions. Let's continue to challenge ourselves, to think creatively. Let's be inspired by Mina and Chris and by what they do in their activities, by what we do at UBS, by the many good initiatives we have. Let's use our creativity, let's collaborate and act sustainably so we can build a more sustainable world for the generations to come. Thank you all again for being a part of our keynote session today. We look forward to your participation in many other net zero waste initiatives this week, and I wish you a good continuation of your day. Thank you.